Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I wanted to thank especially our speakers. So we have got the creator of The Split, Abi Morgan. Many of you will have heard of. She is a playwright, screenwriter, and the author of a very popular book that I've seen everywhere recently in social media, This Is Not a Pity Memoir. So welcome, Abi. We also have The Split's executive producer, Lucy Dyke, who joined the TV production company Sister to executive produce the show. Thank you very much for joining us, Lucy. We also have Charlotte Bradley, who's the head of the family team at Kingsley Napley, and also one of the lawyer members of the Family Solutions Group, which we may hear a little bit about later. And then finally, Samantha Woodham, who is a barrister at Four Paper Buildings and also the co-founder of the Divorce Surgery, which hopefully we'll also hear a little bit about. So in terms of the order of play today, I think everybody thinks that the audience is much more likely to enjoy hearing from Abi and Lucy. So we're going to play it by ear, and we will come to Charlotte and Sam at the end, but we're going to see how much we want to hear and what we get from Abi and Lucy first. And so in terms of timing, we'll see how we go. And then at the very end, we have got Sister kindly gave us the outtakes reel from The Split. So we will play that at the end of the show, at the end of the session. But it's about 6 minutes long, I think. So feel free to stay and watch it if you want to, but do head off if you've got other things to get to. So very, very quickly from me, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my involvement in The Split. So I became involved as the legal advisor when Abi was writing series 1. I met with Abi and lots of members of the production team just to talk about what we did, you know, what our clients experienced, the types of cases that we had, and what it was like in the family law world. What I was really struck by was how much Abi and the team really cared about what life was like for us, but also for our clients. And I know that a lot of research went into it in terms of the day-to-day for us all. Then Abi and the team checked the overall storylines with me for all of the series. And so I read all of the scripts and just helped with some of the scenarios and the terminology, which is amazing just to see sort of how the series grew. I also watched some of the filming in series 1, which is amazing. And again, just to give me a bit of an insight into the production, I had all these sort of thoughts of what it would be like. And I remember sitting in one of what I thought was like a director's chair and had the earphones and everything. And I was there for a really long time, but watching the same scene filmed over and over and over and over again from different angles. And it was just so interesting to see because, you know, you think that these things are produced pretty quickly, but actually you can see the time, the effort and the thought that goes into it. And then finally, we spoke throughout the creation of all 3 series, and most recently talking about the Good Divorce, which is, I know Abi's going to talk a little bit more about, and it was just such perfect timing because we knew that the no-fault divorce regime was coming into force for us, and it was going to tie in quite neatly with the airing of series 3. And so we also introduced Abi and the team to other people in the family law world, so people that we use for our clients. I'm thinking of Sam and how Abi and Sam met and how that fed into the Good Divorce. I think the team spoke to one of the child psychotherapists that we use regularly with our clients, who actually was with us this morning doing some training for our team, but also who help our clients to think about what their children are going through in divorce and separation. So it was really great just to put the team in touch with the other people who impact our day-to-day lives in the family law. Well, so anyway, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Lucy and to Abi, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and we can't wait to hear your stories. So first of all, Abi, I'll come to you if that's okay. And if you could just tell us a little bit about The Split, how it came about, and sort of the 3-series arc for Hannah.
Okay, hi, thank you everyone. It's lovely to, it's slightly terrifying actually. I think both Lucy and I agree it feels like I'm staring into the mouth of the lion, but I will tell you how it started. So I was standing by a hockey pitch one day watching my teenage daughter play hockey, and I got in a conversation with a mum who I didn't know particularly well, who turned out to be a family lawyer. And by the end of that hockey match, I was less interested in the game and more interested in this feeling like there's an amazing drama here. I loved her approach, but more than anything, I loved the way she told me that actually it was a very female led area of law. I mean, I know there are a lot of men and we've met some amazing male lawyers, but it felt like it was quite female centric, and that was very intriguing to me, because I think you're always trying to find, I'm always interested in ensembles of women, and that's for a number of reasons. Ensembles of women are really important because you help build up the currency of a group of actresses rather than one actress who chops a carrot in the back in a kitchen while her lawyer husband does the conversation or plays a girlfriend. And I suddenly thought, this is an amazing world. But also I think we've got very excited about the notion that London was the divorce capital of the world. And I've worked with Jane Featherstone at Sister for a long time, and Lucy and I have been working on this show from the beginning. And I think as a female ensemble, we wanted to do something that would be high-end, glamorous, funny, emotional, and a kind of Trojan horse for a relationship drama. I think it's the kind of holy grail in television if you can make that work. And so the lives and the loves of these divorce lawyers felt really exciting, a little bit like accountants who aren't that good at handling their own money. We wanted to see that prism within a group of lawyers' lives, and also something that was multi-generational, because as we know, divorce and certainly the different areas of family law affect every aspect of family, be it a teenage daughter watching her parents fall apart, through to an older woman confronted with an ex-husband who she hasn't really emotionally resolved with. And so that felt like a great platform to look at these intergenerational relationships. But also I just loved meeting the lawyers, and the lawyers we met were really inspiring. I felt there was something on the whole very holistic, and the ones that weren't, they themselves felt like fascinating characters. And so it felt like a great way to look at kind of the 21st century in the prism of and look at marriage, and what does marriage mean now in a world where I think 45% of people live together, and so wanting to look at how those work. So yeah, that was the kind of inspiration really in the starting point.
I just to add to that as well, when we first set out to make this with the BBC, they loved the idea of it, but they said it can't be bleak. Sounds, is divorce going to be bleak? Is it going to be? And actually, it was never going to be bleak. It was never going to be those things. It's always filled with joy and hope, and positivity. And I think, what divorce cases and lots of family law cases give us just naturally are messy, not straightforward cases with lots of complications, but that they are always emotional. And so we could really dig down into that and reassure them that it was never going to be, that it wasn't going to be bleak. And I think we delivered on that.
Absolutely, thank you. So we're all really interested to know what made you choose sort of the good divorce, that slightly better way for series 3. So over to both of you, perhaps Abi first.
Well, I'd always conceived the show in the form of 3 series. I wanted to look about the legacy of divorce. I come from, parents who got divorced in the early 80s, and it was a pretty brutal time. And my parents had a very brutal divorce. So I'd sort of grown up through that kind of acrimony around a divorce. And then having spoken to a number of divorce lawyers, and also having met blended families over the years, and because, it's very rare that you're not confronted in some way by a different kind of family. I wanted to see if we could look at the legacy of a woman's divorce from her own parents, and then move it through to her own divorce, and actually what that would mean. So it was always devised that it would start with the return of a father who had been effectively abandoned and ostracized from the family home, and how the 3 sisters and the mother, the Ruth Defoe at the helm, accepted him back into their lives, and then how that made Hannah reflect on her marriage with Nathan, and the subsequent kind of breakdown of that marriage, and the affair, which really dominates series 2, and then series 3 is really about the fallout from that affair, and moving towards the good divorce. And I conceptually I wanted to look at the notion that actually a lawyer very early on said to us, and it's something that Hannah quotes in the show, but it really struck me. She said, I don't see divorce as failure. I just see some marriages as finite. And I think the Victorian construct of a marriage that will run the course was for a period when, most people died of consumption in their 40s and 50s. What about this second phase or even third phase in your life? And so I wanted to also take out the sting of of divorce being a failure, and is there a better way of doing it? And so the show has been building towards that from day one, and from the first episode of series 1 really. And so I hope it's it's that. And we were very aware that the no fault divorce was coming in. I mean, there was talk of it certainly around the time when we were filming series 2, and there'd obviously been long running conversations. We had to keep it loose because at the time when I was writing it, it wasn't definitive, but certainly by the April, I think we started to realize that it was more rock solid. So, but we kept it vague. But that was the kind of idea that we wanted to try and broach the idea. And then also we'd had a great conversation with Samantha of the divorce surgery, and that suddenly felt like a very inspiring model, which was holistic, bringing in mediation, slightly taking out a lot of what felt like a lot of red tape, particularly because we're dealing with high-end divorce. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to think about with the show, and what we've done so far is that it's very much high-end of divorce, not the sort of those kind of bona fide cases, those cases where legal aid being cut everywhere would also be an element, so that we could look at different stratas of society, because it is very much looking at high-end London divorce at the moment.
I think it was about Hannah kind of practicing what she preaches as well, which is right from the beginning. We know that Hannah believes in the good divorce, that she doesn't want to fight it out in court and clock up the billable hours, which I think we quoted more than once in the show. And so it was, and also I think because we invested so much in Hannah and Nathan, we wanted to get them to a good place. So by the time, we left them in series 2, we knew that it was looking pretty bad for them. It didn't look like it was going to be fixable. And then at the beginning of series 3, it looks like they're there. It looks like they've done it. But obviously we couldn't start the series with their good divorce and leave it there. So we had to find some things to throw at them along the way. So Kate, first of all, and then the revelation that Kate was having Nathan's baby became the kind of big sticking point. And that allowed us to take them on the journey where we can take them all the way down. We can have the acrimony, we can have the arguments, and we can let all of that kind of emotion out. But ultimately, when it got really bad for them, they were able to sit down together and inspired by you, Sam, inspired by your model, they were able to sit down together and talk it all through and work it out, kind of just the two of them. So yeah, we loved working with that model of the good divorce. It was always the intention. And again, it's where you find the hope and the positivity, and the place that we leave Hannah at the end of it is that we don't necessarily know her future. We don't know if she's going to jump on a plane to find Christy, if Christy's going to arrive at the door, if JJ Johnson perhaps is, waiting around the corner, or if it's something else completely. But actually the idea that she'll be okay on her own, she's got this incredible family around her, that was the message that we wanted to leave it with at the end.
I mean, just to chip in, I have to say, I find what was fantastic about the third series was just to remind us all about separation. Of course, it's emotional, it's sad, it doesn't have to be angry all the time, because all the stuff on television and film is all about the anger. And I think what was really clever is the way, first of all, you dealt with grief in all types of grief, which I think that was really important. And also, even at the end, when they're coming to terms, the breakdown, which of course enabled them to sit down because they had gone through that journey, the grief cycle. The fact that, that still Nathan was having a panic attack in her office, those are the kind of things that we see as family lawyers. But I think we all liked when the fact he walked in and told Melanie that he wasn't going to use her anymore. That was quite fun. But no, I think well done.
I think that's lovely to hear, but also I think one of the things that really attracted us was the characters in family law. You've got to remember that we all work within our tribes and our slipstream of people. So we've worked with Hollywood execs, and we've worked with diva actresses, and we've worked with difficult directors, as well as lovely actors, directors, etc. But we have our types, and it was just amazing to be. I think the first party we had, Connie, I think we were just like fascinated by everybody, because it felt like there were the kind of, the diva lawyers, and it felt like there were the lawyers, the kind of holistic, nurturing lawyers, and it felt like there was the flamboyant head of a company who, own marriage was going down the pan, and it felt like there were all of these wonderful characters. And so I think for us, it opened this little portal into another world. And then I think the other thing that's so important and true is, the complexities of some of the divorces I've known, I've seen, I've witnessed. I think certainly I reflected on my own relationship. I was going through my own grief, my own situation, and I'd certainly think that made me reflect about different forms of separation, and also the notion of friendship at the heart of it, that actually a good marriage is a friendship, and somehow you have to retain that friendship as parents. And we kept on seeing models of that and actually being really inspired by that. And I think most people don't want the big fight. I think what's very interesting about high-end divorce is you're dealing with high-end stakes, you're dealing with huge amounts of money, you're dealing with a huge amount of privilege. And so that was also where some of those stories came from, because then you've also got the other element of press interest, or kind of historical, cultural, aristocratic interest, or just the sort of, we touched upon the Me Too element in series 2 with the kind of celebrity marriage that was going down the pan. So it gave us a lot of different kinds of ways into different kinds of relationships as well.
I was going to ask actually whether the two of you were sort of surprised by, the more you got to know it. I think I said to you, Abi, you probably could advise a client, or you knew about the process and the law by the end. Were you surprised by how different or maybe the same it was once you'd really got into it?
I think what surprised me is that in this modern age, the way those divorces can run, and that actually no one is immune to conflict, and that actually marriage is a business, and when it comes down to it, when businesses fall apart, then they can become very acrimonious. So I think that became incredibly intriguing. But also, my kids go to a rather posh school in North London, and so I'd sort of literally been privy to several of these kind of marriages around me. And so again, I kept on thinking, this is so far removed from, I know, another strata of society. So there is an escapist element to it. I think one of the things that, again, when I go back to I think what's great about the no-fault divorce potentially, and with the notion of the good divorce, is that for people who don't have that level of money and access, it is bringing a much more holistic, simplified version of it, and that I think is inspiring and important, because we got into a few of those custody battles, but I think we also wanted to focus on putting it in the domain of the adult world mainly, didn't we? And so I would hope that some of those no-fault divorce elements would really help that area of the divorce law.
It's interesting thinking back to series 1 and the Goldie story, and there's that brilliant scene with Hannah where she sits with Goldie and she has to listen to the reasons that Davy has cited, and it was so painful for her, which was great drama for us, but actually lovely that by the end of the 3 series of the split, we're in this different place. And that no-fault divorce is it feels so progressive.
And also, my parents got divorced in 1981, and around that time, Margaret Thatcher, whether you love her or hate her, she decreed that women for the first time could have a credit card without the signature of their husbands. And I think a lot of women using credit on a credit card were able to look at the first stages of divorce, or find money to leave. So even something like that felt so powerful and political, and to show the evolution from 1981 to 2022 as well. I think we even had that evolution going on just in 3 series. I think what would be really interesting to see is how does the no-fault divorce progress over the next 4 to 5 years as a model. And can it really work? And does it really work? I suppose that's a question I'd throw back to you, actually, Connie.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been trying so hard to take the acrimony out of it, and the no-fault divorce is fantastic. We've wanted it for years, but actually, because that's only one element of it, it's the legal let's dissolve our marriage part, whereas there's whole behind the scenes of let's sort out the finances, the children, or the other bits that aren't necessarily legal that we're trying to help with. So I hope it's just going to get better and better, and there can be a not so interesting TV show about it in a few years' time about how we all just sort it out very calmly.
But I think that's what we were able to show with Hannah, because she, in the end, we talked about this right from series 1, that we wanted to take a divorce lawyer to face her own divorce and what that would look like. So in a way, through Hannah, you've got the sort of very calm, measured lawyer in her, dealing with her everyday cases, putting on her armor every day and going to work, and then you also get to see her kind of falling apart as well.
And I suppose it's the other thing you say, it's not just divorce that you deal with. It's obviously the concept of prenup. It's conversations around inheritance, it's adoption, it's surrogacy. There were so many different elements that we started to play around with some of those very simplified stories of the week, because the stories of the week were always reflecting back on the main, whatever was happening to those sisters, predominantly Hannah, but whatever was happening towards them. But as a world, and have, it's also incredibly fascinating as a world, from the outside. And I think for us, what was wonderful as well was just the world of offices. I mean, I've always loved, I did a show called The Hour before this, and I love the world of offices. I just love the metronome. And so one of the things that fascinated us the most was that under every desk were like millions of pairs of trainers. So all of, and then and this sort of lovely idea of like women were running into work, and running out, but actually the heels went on at essential moments. So, and then the element of performance of courts. I mean, ironically, we don't actually spend that much time in a courtroom, because I think courtrooms are notoriously hard, but there is an element of performance that I felt took place within the domain of the law and the court that actually you could bring forward to home. So what is it like to live with a barrister or a lawyer? What is it like to live with someone who knows how to advocate, knows how to present an argument? I mean, out of work actors every time for me, quite frankly, because, I think it must be very powerful that to live with somebody who's so good at that within their own life, within their own working life, and then to bring that home. And so the sparring as well that went on between not only the sisters, but Nathan and Hannah became a great joy for us as well to play with.
You wrote the most incredible argument between Hannah and Nathan.
Oh yeah, it was too brutal.
Seriously, when their relationship was really falling apart, and oh my God, they went for each other. And when we got to the edit, it was right at the beginning of the last episode of series 2. And when we got to the edit, there was this 7-minute scene, which was beautifully written, beautifully acted, but so painful to watch that we decided we couldn't use it. We just couldn't go there. It was too
slices, didn't we?
Too much. So we ended up using snippets of it throughout the episode, just to kind of punctuate and kind of highlight bits of the emotion through her journey. But actually seeing it all left us nowhere to go. We were like, oh, okay, that's done then.
I remember seeing that on paper and thinking, gosh, because it's so stark in black and white. But I think, Charlotte, it's interesting what you say as well in terms of that the anger that you often see presented on screen, because I think one of the things that's been interesting, just the feedback I've got, from friends, but also through social media, is so many people have said it was such a relief to see that I could have grief around my divorce, that I could feel really sad and conflicted about my feelings for my ex, even though I'm glad I went through the divorce. I'm glad. It was so reassuring to realize that I could still acknowledge that notion that we had been friends, that we'd meant something to each other. And I think that's what, really for me came out of talking to lawyers and realizing how much holistically they wanted to hold that for couples. And in a way, that's what's such a fascinating role as a lawyer, from your point, from as a family lawyer, because, you're psychotherapist, you're nurse, you're advocate, you're teacher, you're lawyer, you're everything, but often you can see the damage they're doing to each other. And so I think we were in a very privileged position to start to try and write that. And I think that's the powerful thing about drama is, it's see it to be it. You can write. The irony is we're just reflecting the world that's there. But sometimes when you put it on the screen, it allows people to go, oh, right, I recognize that model, or I want that model. And so that's been one of the nicest things about the show, is that we felt like we've had that feedback. And also I've had a couple of feedbacks from women who divorced years ago, 30, 40 years ago. And when they die, or they're near the end of their life, that person's asked to be at their deathbed. It's very moving to realize that actually on paper a marriage might have finished, but a relationship goes on in some form, even if it's only psychically. So again, I think we were able to sort of carry that within the show.
I think it was good that you brought in a child psychologist. I have to say, I find Kate a bit preachy. I don't know if that was intended.
Yeah, no, she's meant to be pretty annoying, to be honest.
But it's really important, because, you've talked about all the things we are as family lawyers, but one thing that good family lawyers do is constantly refer clients out to other professionals, be it a therapist or a child psychotherapist, and I think that was a good reminder. And I suppose the other thing was, because she was the girlfriend, Hannah went through her feelings, but managed to process them to the point where she wanted to put the children ahead of her own feelings about Kate. And it was absolutely clear she didn't like Kate, but I thought that was well done.
Abi, you mentioned the different cases, the stories of the week that you had. Can I just ask you and Lucy how you chose those? Because I think we discussed lots of different sort of themes, areas of law, but what made you settle on those?
was always to do with what our main characters were going through. We always worked out that part first. And then you had helped us with loads of research, Connie, and our researcher had also done lots and lots of, so we had a sort of stack of cases, of pre-cases, real life cases that we were kind of referring to and using. But it always referred back to whatever Hannah was going through, or whatever Nina was going through, and we needed to find something that thematically linked the two things together.
And they're often delivered in 2 or 3 tiny beats. You know, we don't spend a lot of time. We very rarely go home. Certainly with the story of the week, it's different with the serial story that we tend to run. But with the story of the weeks, we often went for quite big, vivid worlds. So the worlds of professional footballers, or fading aristocracy, or celebrity, celebrity of some kind, or the world of fashion and modeling, or or big, sort of big sort of a couple, Goldie and Davy we're kind of based on, kind of working class made good and made millions, and actually in the context of more money, more wealth, more high profile, would that marriage survive, and could that marriage survive? So we tended to try and find very vivid worlds that were a good counterpoint, and in some ways they were often they always feel like just tasters of those cases, rather than, we don't go through the whole thing, we just give sort of key moments of change. But there were some irresistible ones. I mean, invariably, you also get very kind of enamored. There are certain ones we just, in series 3, we went into that lovely Italian restaurant, and that became great fun. They create their own characters. They create often a great counterpoint to the sort of drama of that family. And they remind you that there is a world beyond that family. But again, it's very high end. I keep seeing on social media, people have actually managed to track down the house that Hannah lives in and have posted how much it's worth. And, you realize that actually you're kind of going, honestly, there is an escapism here. It is meant to be this slightly other world as well. And we try and do that, therefore, with those stories of the week as well. Because again, they're coming to high end lawyers. You're not going to, you're not necessarily going to see, 2 teachers necessarily going there, or people who are on the average income are not going to be going to those kind of divorce lawyers.
But as drama, it works beautifully. And as a TV show on the BBC, who doesn't want to look behind closed doors? Of course you want to go and take a sneak peek behind the, what's going on behind the doors of Fee and Richie. That house was in Richmond. It was incredible. That it was so much fun to create all of those things.
And Hannah's wardrobe as well obviously fed into that, because she was always wearing the most incredible clothes.
Well, at the end of every series, we have a costume sale, which is the most popular thing with all the cast and crew.
It's so funny. For months on, people come into meetings and you go, "Isn't that Hannah's coat from episode 3, series 3?" So there's a lot of that going on. I think the other thing about that as well is that, it was almost trying to take the curse out of that high-end money as well, and realize that, whether you were a pop star or a footballer or, a high-end surgeon, or actually, when it comes down to it, people's problems are pretty similar. They're often over the same things. They're over betrayal and neglect and isolation and loneliness and, jealousy. They're pretty universal themes. So although there is an escapism, really it's still a Trojan horse to go there, but by the grace of God go I. They are always about reflecting on the self as well. So I think that's what, that was what I came away realizing, that, when we talked to some of the lawyers, some of the kind of petty squabbles or just the pain that are at the heart of those, what seemed like incredibly glamorous couples, felt very real and identifiable at the end of the day. And I guess that's what we're trying to marry, is those 2 worlds, something that's high end, but also accessible.
And I think that's what we did through Hannah, actually. I think that's why by series 3, it takes, relationship dramas always take a long time to establish, because you have to spend so long getting to know those people. But actually, by the time you get to series 3, and we're so with Hannah, we're so rooting for her as a person, that whatever she's going through, we can feel it intensely, and go through it with her. And I think that's why it really worked to bring those 2 things together in her character.
I'm going to come on and ask you a little bit about the sort of production itself in a minute, but one of the questions that we've just had, it was long comments about how wonderful everything was, and how they've lots of questions, but one of their questions in particular was, what are your thoughts on Rose's and Nina's stories, and just commenting on the parallels with bereavement and divorce. So if there's anything you wanted to add about Nina and Rose in particular.
Well, I think it's a tricky one. I mean, I think Rose, that we definitely, we're dramatists, we have to find a spike in the story, and we wanted to give it another end as a counterpoint to the fact that actually death is the ultimate deadline, it's the ultimate ending, and it's the ultimate separation. And in a way, I think it was less about comparing the two, more about invigorating this group of women and going, it's terrible divorce, and it's terrible, the broken love affair, but just remind yourselves that we're only here now for this moment. And so I guess that framework felt very important to me for this third series. And I loved James and Rose together. I was absolutely in love with them as a couple, and I felt like I had to separate them in order to sacrifice that relationship for the kind of the ricochet that would have on, particularly on Nathan and Hannah, to kind of, and would be the kind of slow growing wake up call. So I think it was never to compare that. I mean, there's a scene in episode 2 where or episode 3, I can't remember, where Hannah and Rose meet at the book launch together, and Hannah's sort of going, yeah, no, I totally get it, I mean, I'm going through my own thing with Nathan, and Rose is just like, are you kidding me? Are you trying to compare what I'm going through? And I guess it was about a nod to that thing of, however bad it is, there will be life after this, and don't forget that there can be life after this, and also there can be love again. And ultimately that's also where we leave Rose, with the possibility that actually once she's put down her grief there will be life. Everything is about renewal and recovery, this last series. So I think that's what we were trying to do with that. You can answer about Nina, Lucy. What would you say about Nina?
Goodness, Nina's so much fun. I mean, I think, what was the brilliant thing you said at the beginning, Abby, about the women representing kind of 4 waves of feminism?
I thought they were like representing 4 waves of feminism. It's always I know that myself. I look at the generation behind me going, God, when I first used to go into those writers' parties, I was about 1 of 2 women in the room, and now I go in and there are pretty, like, I would say 30 to 50% women now in the industry, much more. And so I think what we wanted to do with Ruth, take Ruth from the top, who kind of, she'd been a lawyer through the, 80s into the 90s. And then you take Hannah, who kind of thinks she's invented law, in the kind of end of the 90s going into the noughties. And then Nina, who's the kind of whippersnapper who's biting at heels. And then, in a way, Rose in her sort of early 30s is meant to represent coming from a place which is, less about, being part of a corporate world and more about the value of your place in society and what you can do from the world. And so it was about these women who've all inadvertently been inspired and then infect the lives of the generation behind them. And so that's why we were playing with Nina. And so Nina really represents, in a way, that woman who has a real sense of her own independence, but also, and in a way, the generation before her were the career women, and she's kind of come up behind them going, yeah, no, but of course I can have a career, of course I can do these things, but actually also can't quite cope with it, and actually still wants all those kind of quite traditional things, or human things, which is love and connection and a relationship with someone, even though it's ill-advised. And she, as Lucy said, she was just great fun to write. And I think that was also that idea of addiction.
Yeah.
We wanted to look at the addictive nature of love, the addictive nature of destructive love affairs, and those having parallel and literal addictions. I think that's what we were playing with that. And I guess,
also ultimately bringing 2 addicts together and finding out what they would do. And I think ultimately with all of them, that it's about, they can always find strength in each other. So no matter what happens to all of them, those 4 sisters, even those 3 sisters and their mother, even though they're all so different, they're such differently defined characters, they all work brilliantly as a group.
I know when they go to get James's clothes back from the charity auction, I loved that. Right. Don't mess with us, we're here.
Yeah, it's a good moment.
There's another few questions also coming through, just saying people are finding it very hard to get over missing them now that it's come to an end, and they'd all love to see what the key characters are doing in 5 years' time. Any plans to have anything in 5 years' time to see how everybody else or the No Fault world is doing in 5 years' time? Through that out, so both of you.
Maybe. We'll never say never.
Yeah, I think never say, I mean, we're, as a creative team, we're continuing to work together. We love that show so much. We love the ethos of the show and that notion of ensemble. So we're in conversations now, and we do listen. It's love. We genuinely appreciate that response, and I really, I think we do feel a responsibility to fans now, and that real, the fans who have committed to that show. So we're just sort of working on various ideas. But I think certainly all the kind of ethos of what we love about the show, we're trying to find ways to continue. I think the truth is we will always define that show in that way, and I could come up with any number of different answers. Perhaps I'll just do some spin-off fan literature, or get the fans to start to write. Maybe that's the way to do is sometimes they come up with better ideas than I would be able to come up with. So but I definitely think we're talking about it now, and there'll be news, I'm sure, soon.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. We definitely took the Defoe family to the place that we wanted to get them to, and we ended their stories in a way that we wanted to end them on our terms, and that felt like the right place to kind of leave them all behind for now. It may be that we do. I mean, we do genuinely love these characters, and I think it's really, it's impossible to work on a show about love for 5 years and not completely fall in love with those characters. Otherwise, you're doing something wrong. But I think for now, that 3-series arc was the right thing to do. It was the right decision to make, to say goodbye to them, and not just to keep spinning it on and on and on. I mean, there's any number of things that we could have done. We could have really looked closely at the blended family through Nathan and Kate and Hannah, but it's not the right time to do that, I don't think, not with those characters. So we're talking about different things that we could potentially do in the future, and not let the split kind of legacy completely disappear. So fingers crossed.
That's how difficult it was to come up with a title. I don't know who.
No, the title was there from the beginning. Actually, it's very weird. I mean, I remembered. We started talking about the show 7 years ago, so the title was there from day one. And in a weird way, I think titles are very interesting. They're the organizing principle for a show, and they can often be the hardest thing. But I guess, as I said before, the split. I'm 53 years old, and my parents' marriage has had an imprint on myself and my siblings for the rest of our lives, and it's given us it's an internal split as well. So I'm interested in that, and I think we all have those in different ways, so from different events and, of course, moments in our life. So that felt very much there from the beginning, really. It was that, yeah. I mean, what was funnier was when we were just playing around with how many siblings there were, and we kept on I think we dialed in and dialed out quite a few siblings. I definitely think there was a rogue brother for a while that was in there.
We killed him off.
And we killed him off. And certainly that's the great thing with drama. You just have to sort of throw everything at it, and then a lot of it is about what you take out. So we were constantly sort of taking out, but it helped we had that title. And I sometimes, when you can't find a title for a show, it's often related to there's a problem in the show, because the title often comes because you absolutely know what the thesis of your show is. And so, I think we were lucky that we got that quite early on.
Yeah, and we used it thematically throughout every episode. You can see the splits, whether it's within a character, whether it's, quite literally to do with the divorces, or whether it's more kind of in depth than that. And we used it so much when we were creating the show and the storylining of it. We would just sit for hours and hours and hours and talk about our own experiences and those of our friends and family, very confidentially. But it really does come from so much truth.
And also I think we've written the show at a time where globally we became so split. We weren't able to be in the same room as our families, and then relationships were very close together. I mean, I think one of the things that, I think would be, we didn't explore in the context of the show that much. We did a little bit, but not much, about domestic violence, for example. And we know the issues, the figures around pandemics, and the way so many, there was such a shutdown on that conversation within the context of a broken marriage. But I think what's interesting is a global pandemic. I'm really curious, as I said, to see what what's going to come out of that, whether that's, in some ways, I think it's brought us all closer together. In other ways, we know that some marriages won't survive. And so I think we were also very mindful when we were working on the 3rd series, and certainly writing a lot of that show via Zoom, and meetings via Zoom, that we were talking about bigger splits that were going on seismically in a country as well. So
I wonder if that's one of the reasons that the 3rd series in particular really, really connected with people, because I think it's quite difficult to find something that gives you an excuse to access your emotions in that way. And in a way, Hannah and what she was going through allowed us all just to bawl our eyes out in our living rooms if we wanted to, without feeling guilty about it, or without having to explain ourselves. So it allows you to just sort of get in there and access something that's potentially not available to you otherwise.
There's a writer called Jack Thorne, very good writer, and he describes the television as the empathy box in the corner of the room. And I think there is something very powerful about that. You're allowed to feel something and connect with something in your own home and in a very private way. I've always felt that television is very quietly political, particularly now when people watch on their phones or on their iPads as well, because you can have quite a kind of quite a considered conversation with an audience as a result of that, because people aren't necessarily sitting watching it with us. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not, but they're often watching it on their own as well.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one final point about production, I guess, you, Lucy. So just talk to us about sort of production challenges, making a legal drama, the joys of it, and if COVID was a problem in any way.
COVID's been a massive problem for everybody making shows, as it has been for every industry everywhere. I mean, to be honest, look, it's not making a legal drama in some ways, as we've kind of said, you know, it wasn't necessarily a legal drama, and so much of it is there in the writing. It's mostly about the characters and the relationships, and it sort of masquerades as a legal drama. So obviously we want to get those things right, which is where you came in and Sam came in, and we made sure that it's not a documentary, you know, we made sure that there was enough truth in it to get away with it, I suppose. And the challenges, I guess like anything, you know, we had 3 different offices throughout the 3 series of The Split. Each episode went to a different office. The first one was a bit of a gift on High Holborn, which came to us via Jane Featherstone's colleague. They happened to mention on a research trip that they were moving out of there, and it timed perfectly with our production, so we got to go in and use it, which was amazing. And then the second time we couldn't find an office anywhere, so we ended up building a set, which takes up quite a chunk of your budget, but actually gives you kind of freedom in the way that you can use that space. And then in the 3rd series we found another new office, but we didn't allude to it in the 3rd series. We just sort of felt that people would accept it, and also if by then they were looking at the office, then we'd lost them anyway, and it wasn't
you were
right.
very, very nearly filming in our offices.
I know,
we
remember.
moved from Farringdon to Moorgate, and it just didn't quite work out timing, so we missed out.
That's right.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of COVID itself, I mean, the obvious story is the camping trip, isn't it? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we had a hiccup. So basically the way that a production schedule works is you shoot out locations. So we'd filmed everything there was to film at Hannah's house and said goodbye to that location, which included the trip, the beginning of the trip, the camping trip. So we'd filmed all of the family piling into the cars at the beginning of the trip, Nathan included getting into that car. And then we'd also filmed the end of it when they come home and Hannah and Nathan get locked out of the house and have that conversation in the camper van. So we were sort of completely locked into that story, no matter how we did it. On the day that we went camping, Nathan couldn't be with us because of a COVID related incident. So we suddenly had to work out how we were going to do that whole camping story once they got there, when Nathan's just clearly not in the car. So Abi did some brilliant rewriting, and we decided that we would give Nathan food poisoning. So we made up the story. We filmed everything that we could film at the camping trip on the actual campsite. And then about 2 months later, we went to Wimbledon Common and pitched a tent on Wimbledon Common, and we restaged these scenes with Hannah and Nathan, with Vinny and Nathan inside that tent, and lots of shots of Nathan feeling a bit peaky. And then around the corner in just a pub car park, we did a really tight shot of the camper van. I don't know if you remember, at the very end of it, we did the rain coming down in the campsite. So we've got a really tight shot of Nathan running out at the last minute to get in, which was shot in a car park in Wimbledon. And we included a couple of pickup shots that helped us get into it helped us explain that they had wet clothes, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think the camping trip was really fun. I mean, I directed the camping trip, and the camping trip actually was really fun as a kind of group of actors to go away together and do that little camping trip. You know, I think it was our first little trip outside of London, and we all stayed together in a hotel, and that was all really lovely. But also, you know, there was so much fun to be had. So, you know, Nicola, I mean, what we should really preface this whole conversation with saying that you don't always get an amazing constellation of actors. You normally sometimes you get one who's a pain in the butt, or, you know, that doesn't get on, or they just don't get on. This is just one of those, you get these maybe once every 3-4 shows where everybody gets on brilliantly, and they really did. And so those sisters get on very well, but also the joy they had playing, you know, Nathan not being there. And there's this wonderful take, I think we've got in, but Hannah goes to the tent and rips it open and starts shouting her head off at nobody, and it just made me laugh so much, because the props department had made that tent their like home, and I just knew it was like trashed with goodies in there that day. So she was just shouting at a load of props guys huddled in a corner. So there were lots of little things like that you could play around with that just became really great fun. And again, also actors who love the roles, know the show really well, they shape shifted. And that was the great thing with COVID. You know, you'd be shooting a scene and someone might come in and say, oh, the sister of one of the kids has got ill, you've got to take them off set now. And so, you know, there was so many issues around COVID. Or I mean, I think we had a show with 3 DOPs, you know, didn't we? I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
my episode, I've got 3 different directors of photography, which is, you know, you'd normally have one for a whole series. So it's very, you know, everybody, they brought up their A game in terms of responding to it, I guess.
Yeah, there was a lot of shape-shifting around. I think we had 9 COVID incidents in the end where we had to kind of change the schedule at the last minute or rewrite stuff, or, you know, but hopefully at the end of it, it actually made it better. I feel like that camping trip wouldn't have been quite as much fun if we hadn't had to do that. So there are positives that come out of it as well.
Oh, it's fab. Thank you. So as expected, we've been too interested in what you have to say, but I'm going to come on to Sam, you first, and just ask you if you could help us with whether the split succeeded in portraying a good divorce, and maybe whether you think this series has changed public perception about it.
Well, yeah, I think it did succeed. I loved my chat that I had with Abi, and what really struck me was from the earlier stage that the recognition that there was this public broadcaster responsibility here, that, you know, 42% of marriages are going through divorce, people are doing this every day, and perception becomes reality, actually. And when you look at dramas on TV before about divorce, or movies about divorce, they always go for worst case scenario, mudslinging, make it a war. But if you as a person at home going through that, all you see on TV is that it ends up in a war, that's what you're going to expect. And I think what is amazing about series 3 is it doesn't shy away from the fact that divorce is really hard, that emotions are really raw, that it's completely normal not to agree. Of course, you're not, you know, and I think people think good divorce means you have to be a conscious uncoupler like Gwyneth and Chris and stay best friends. It doesn't. It's about recognizing that you're definitely going to disagree about the future, and it's how you handle those disagreements that's the difference maker. And it's about recognizing that, as Abi said, a relationship can be hugely successful and have a shelf life. And I think by getting characters like Hannah and Nathan that we all loved, and then seeing the way that their relationship ending impacted them, you're so invested in them. And seeing that if they channeled their emotions, which they do in the middle of the series, and it all slightly goes wrong, because what's happening is they're channeling their emotions through the legal process. And we all know the legal process is the worst process equipped to deal with those emotions. And so it was kind of demonstrating that. And I think that's what's been amazing about the series. And that's what we need much more of, actually, in terms of changing public perceptions, is about a recognition that divorce is really normal. We all live a really long time. It's okay to transition through relationships, but the way that we deal with divorce at the moment isn't normal. And having some examples of how people have managed that, still dealing with the hard emotions, but coming out on the other side okay. Because you want them to, because Hannah and Nathan are both lovely. So you want them to be okay, but you also recognize this is a really hard transition for them. So I think it was amazing. I think it was a job well done, amazingly well done. And I'm so glad it's out there, because I think it's going to help a lot of people going through it.
Thank you, Sam. Charlotte, can I just ask you what things you think will change society's approach about separation? We've talked a little bit about it, but your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously talked about the important role of the media. I mean, it's interesting because I think I was asked on this, not just because I was a big fan of the split, which I am, but also because I'm the solicitor member of the Family Solutions Group, which a lot of people listening today will know about, which produced a report in late 2020 called What About Me, which was very much about trying to reframe the approach following separation, as we've just been talking about today. So I think in answer is not a single thing, there's no quick fix. But what I would say is the Family Solutions Group we're in the process of setting up as a charity, and we're talking about the 3 Ps. So I think first of all, policy. I mean, obviously we've talked today about no fault divorce, which is really, really important. But I think to ensure it's not just symbolic, we really need the government to step up. And currently there's no single government department that takes responsibility for the separated family, which I think surprises a lot of people. And we need a proper cross-governmental approach. At the moment, really the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, takes responsibility, and that means court. So I think that's one thing. I think secondly, we've talked today about practice as well. So we want all family professionals, including the lawyers, to take a sort of more solution-focused approach. So Abby's been talking about the 3rd series being sort of a holistic approach. And of course, court is right for many. There are many people who have to go to court, but it's not right for lots of people. So I think this is where the importance of training comes in for lawyers, and the importance of signposting to good child therapists or psychologists. And then finally, we've talked about again is the 3rd P, which is public perception. I mean, I think there's loads to be done on this. I mean, we've already, the SFG need to reach into schools. So there's already a new, we've had a curriculum approved, which is talking about, the importance of how you resolve conflict, because that's a big issue. But is the importance of the choice of language that the media use, and even the government get the language wrong around separation. So correct legal language. And I think more programs like The Split, which show an alternative view. And as Sam says, it's hard, divorce, but it doesn't have to be just like some of the films and TV. And I think that has a big impact. So yes, there's lots to be done, but it's not going to change overnight. But thank you, as Sam says, well done, because I think it has brought and actually it's interesting because I do quite a bit of international work, and a lot of foreign lawyers have really enjoyed The Split. I was really interesting. I went to Paris and I met 3 French lawyers who all said they'd really enjoyed The Split. So there you go.
That's very funny, actually, because there's the Turkish version. I think we've got
there's the Italian version as well. They've made
Italian version and Korean. South
they're making a North
Korean
Korean version, South Korean version.
North Korean version.
That would be different. That would be different. Yeah, and I think there might be a French one in the offing as well.
Yeah.
I think it's coming. Yeah. Great.
Can I just read? So I'm going to say to the audience, if you have any questions, do put them in the chat box. I'm just trying to go through them. But while everyone's having a think about that, I just wanted to read this one to you. It said, I love Nina's storyline. I want to let you know that one of my clients, after watching The Split Series 3, did a Hannah and Nathan. She sat down and wrote down their settlement in bullet points on a napkin. We've been negotiating this for the last 3 years with mediation, a family consultant and solicitor negotiations. As a family lawyer for over 20 years and advocate of the good divorce, it was so refreshing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing. Abby, you're muted.
Yeah, that's
really amazing.
Yeah, really amazing, actually. I think there's so much shame around divorce.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big thing about brand of family. I think we have to rethink what a brand of a family is. That I think we forget, we know social media in the digital age makes us do that. We want to take the perfect photo. We want to have the best love affair. But what we don't show is the beauty in failure, and that the beauty in things not working out, that actually failure is about new life, new independence, change. And maybe it's reframing that. So it's really, it's lovely to hear that. But also thank you to all of you guys who have done such an amazing job. I mean, I think the one of the key reasons that people, one of the things that really helps staying in a marriage is knowing that you have the option to leave it. I think everybody needs to have that as an option, to know that they can be free. And, and so I think the more representation, and certainly our direct experience of some of the family laws we've spoken to has been really inspiring, and just sort of, really made us want to carry on, do something in the area of this work. So I'm sure there'll be more to come in some form.
Interestingly, 3 of us on the creative team got married during the course of The Split. But maybe that's because we know we can get out if we want to.
But I think I do remember when I first met you all before Series 1, we were talking about the interesting dynamics of women who are the breadwinners and who are in scenarios when they are and are not married. So I think, these stories could go on and on, couldn't they? Because they're all really important areas to reflect on.